What we're trying to do with these debates is travel around the country and provide a platform for younger people's interests to be aired, because we don't think this is happening in Westminster. We don't think young people are being represented well in Westminster at the minute, and so we want to try and give a bit of an airing to some of those issues that aren't being heard. I know from a lot of the emails and messages I get that young people are very politically engaged, that they're really they care about political issues and society, but there's a lot of disillusionment with what passes for politics down in Westminster. And so that brings us to tonight's motion that we're going to debate. A generation of young people is right to give up on Westminster. It's a good place to come for this particular motion. Manchester's been setting records here. Manchester Central had the lowest turnout at the last general election. I mean, shockingly low. 44% of people in the ward turned out to vote, compared to a national average of 65%. And it was even worse at the by-election about 15, 16 months ago. Only 18% of people bothered to turn out to vote, which is the lowest anywhere in the UK since the middle of the Second World War, when there are actually bombs falling on the East End. Now, we know that young people voting it's been a long problem where young people tend not to vote. People aged 18 to 24 at the last election, only 44% of them turned out. And among women, it was even lower, it's 39%. And if you compare that to people who are aged over 55, you're looking at like 3/4 of people turn out to vote. So there's a real problem here. I just wanted a quick show of hands before we get started. How many people here will definitely vote at the general election next year? How many people know who they will vote for? There's a lot to play for then. Politicians should pay attention to this.
If I think of all the gains we have, like the welfare state, like the NHS, like workers' rights, things which are now under threat, incidentally, these were won by people organising from below, but they had to have people at the top, firstly, who would actually engage with their demands. For people at the top who they could force to concede if needs be. If I think now of all the issues affecting young people, like tuition fees, EMA, youth unemployment, housing, zero-hour contracts, for example, all the things which young people suffer from, which will make you the first generation for 100 years to be worse off than your parents. The need for political action is greater than ever.
The first reason you guys might want to give up on Westminster is because Westminster's given up on you. There's no group in British politics that has been more shafted, to put it mildly, over the last 4.5 years or 3.5 years of coalition government than people who are late teens and in their 20s. Just take three quick areas. One is the cost of education. When my brother went to university, education was free. You guys, as you well know, and as your parents certainly know, are paying through the nose. The cost of education has gone up incredibly sharply, sometimes being implemented in government by people who said that they wouldn't implement such policies, as is the case with the Lib Dems, and that has not been good for you. Second thing is housing. You guys haven't got a hope in hell of buying a house in London. If you ever plan to move there, you might be in debt for a very, very long time. And that is the result of a very deliberate policy, which is a policy that very senior members of the government have admitted to me, which is that the housing market is fixed so that you guys can't get into it.
For those who are tempted to give up, I think it asks the question, what's the alternative? And I actually don't really think there is a viable alternative at the moment. I think I actually agreed with a reasonable amount of what Russell Brand had to say for himself on the problems with British society and the British political system, but he was noticeably quiet when asked, well, what do you do instead?
Because on the surface it's a bit of a no-brainer. I think we all know that the government would make better policy if it was more representative of people. I think diversity of opinion in any organisation is a good thing and it makes for better output. But what we have to be careful of is the sort of token representation. And it's not particularly radical to say that we want more women in positions of power. Even David Cameron wants that. He doesn't do anything about it, but he does say that he wants that. But Nadine Dorries is a woman in power, and she doesn't represent me. She's got a kind of dodgy track record on voting over abortion rights, which I know a lot of people see as a woman's issue. Margaret Thatcher was a woman with a lot of power. She didn't represent me, and I'm a woman. So I think we have to think about what people actually are fighting for, what their real political views are, and if they're genuinely capable of representing who you are and what you believe, rather than just what they look like, or if they're the same age as you.
Young sons, Cameron's got children, so has Miliband. And so there's a huge amount of policies that are aimed at young children. Childcare, for instance, which the Children's Minister Liz Truss is pushing forward. People who are in their late teens and early 20s are peculiarly underrepresented in Westminster. So again, it's not a place that I think particularly serves you guys at all well. The third thing is, which is maybe a slightly more positive note, which isn't anti-Westminster as much as pro-politics, is that there's other things you guys can do if you want to be political. In the digital age, there's other forms of activism, collectivism, as you might understand them, which are ways of making a huge and concerted political difference. Websites like avaz.org, which has got 30 million members, change.org, which makes a huge difference and scores incredible victories on a daily, let alone weekly basis. And you guys, if you want to get involved in politics, don't now need to be associated with the main parties or indeed Westminster.
Sorry to break it to you, but you're not going to be young people forever, and your choices now are to opt out because the system doesn't represent young people, and then either do nothing forever or opt back in when you're 45 and politicians start to sound and look a bit more like you, and then watch your children have the same debate, except perhaps worse and more depressing. Or you can do a bit of, positive parenting in advance and do something about it now and engage, even if, head-banging slog of trying to change the Westminster system now lacks the instant gratification of clicking on an online campaign, or you can do that as well. But I think that nothing is really going to get better in a big sense if everybody just disenfranchises themselves by throwing in the towel and saying, that's not for me.
Yes, organise. Yes, mobilise from below. Yes, be inspired by the great traditions of this country, people who organise with such sacrifice to themselves. But don't forget that we have to force people at the top to concede, and we need people in Parliament who will listen to those demands out there. That's always how we've got change, both in the past and in the future. It's not either or, so let's start getting organised and let's actually change this country for the better.
I express my political views and sort of fight for causes without going through Westminster. So I'm trustee of a charity that looks after kids that have extraordinarily screwed up lives in a part of North London which is very deprived, and I feel like I can help out with kids that way. I give money to charity. So charity, volunteering and journalism are three ways I suggest you can make a difference without having to go through mainstream politics.
You should also join unions. You should also look for ways to collaborate with people in community organisations that have the same views that you do. You need to get together. Once you're in the room with people who are used to not being heard like you're not being heard, and you're allowed to speak in your own voices, that feeling of solidarity will go with you for the rest of your political lives. So I'd encourage you to do that.
I don't really understand why you would do that and then not also use your right to vote, or at least spoil your ballot, or at least register to vote so that you are a potential elector, and for the duration of the campaign and the months running up to the election, people might actually listen to your views. Candidates don't need to know that you're not going to trouble the ballot box, but if you're at least on the register, then X number of young people are a force that politicians need to try to deal with if they're going to get elected.
I'll take your point about being a journalist. You can actually raise issues, you can put things on the agenda, but the problem with it is no one's elected me. I'm accountable to no one. I'm a voice for absolutely no one whatsoever. And I can just say basically what I like. And we do need people who are accountable to people, who can stand up and actually be a voice for people. And you can only be a voice for anyone if those people can hold you to account, if they can remove you if you don't do the job properly. And that's what democracy does. It gives people that accountability, basically. And without democracy, without having, if you like, some form of party politics or local politics, then you just have unelected, unaccountable voices who no one can get rid of, who speak on behalf of people who have never elected them. And I don't think that's healthy.
Yeah, should suffrage be extended to 16-year-olds, yeah. What do you reckon, Emil? I mean, it's one of the things, they're doing this in Scotland, aren't they? We've got the independence referendum in September. 16-year-olds are going to be able to vote. It was one of the concessions that the Scottish nationalists won.
Yeah,
in the hope that it would help them.
I don't want to sound facetious about this, but I've got to say this is a rare instance where I don't know I don't have strong views either way. I think there's something slightly gimmicky about the idea of extending to 16-year-olds. I mean, to be brutally honest about it, I wouldn't have trusted myself at the age of 16. When I was 16, I wanted to be a porn star, and that and that didn't really work out, as you could tell.
I think there are plenty of ill-informed people who make silly decisions when they're 25, 30, 65. And I think actually as Owen says, a lot of 16-year-olds are remarkably sort of clued up and passionate and care about politics. And I also think that 16 to 18 window is potentially a really important one in terms of engaging people in the political process, getting them voting early. I would have schools as polling stations and the 16-year-olds going and voting in class time and hustings with the candidates.
I used to be against it. I think I'm now in favour. I'm fairly convinced that it would be a good idea. But what do you think, Owen?
I totally support it. I think kind of ridiculous, really. At the age of 16, you've got all these rights and responsibilities. You can join the army and fight for your country. You can get a job and pay taxes. You can have sex. You can start a family. And yet you're denied any right to engage with that process, the political process.
I'm all for giving 16-year-olds a vote, because some 16-year-olds, yes, don't have a clue about politics, in the same way that some 50-year-olds don't have a clue about politics. My parents have never voted. They're quite informed, but they've never voted. It's not about age, it's about information, it's about education. And the fact is, political education at school is non-existent unless you choose it for an AS. That's ridiculous.
So you think, though, you should have it at school, don't you?
Yes, definitely.
And young people are often quite savvy, they understand the issues. If anything, they're almost too informed, because that anger comes about almost knowing, well, these people don't represent us, they screw us over, and we feel disenfranchised, and lots of ways they are. So, you know, it's not a case of ignorance in many ways, it's a case of understanding things, you know, aren't running or working for people like them. And we need to change the political system as well. We need people like that, their voices to be heard in politics, and often they're not. So yeah, sure, let's educate young people. Let's also give them something to vote for.
I had it drummed into me by like my parents that you have to vote.
Yeah.
Like, that is just what you do. And at the same time, I can totally sympathise with disengagement with Westminster politics, because even though I voted, I'm still completely disengaged because I lived in Rushcliffe Borough. Ken Clark's been the MP there for 45 years.
You're not a Conservative, no?
No. And, you know, so even that I engaged with the process of voting, my vote meant nothing.
You're absolutely right. The voting system that we have in this country is a complete and utter disgrace. And it was maintained through a completely cynical and deceitful and mildly corrupt campaign by the Tory side of the coalition, who reneged on a deal not to be brutal and personal about Nick Clegg. The first past the post is an absurd system. It's completely unsuited to modern democracy. It's completely designed for a two-party system. And until we get rid of the idea of safe seats, and until we bring all 646 constituencies into play, we'll continue getting a completely corrupt and unrepresentative system.
Oh, and is there any chance that this is going to actually change? Because, I mean, you know, we've had the referendum, that goose was cooked and eaten, wasn't it? I mean, that's a...
Yeah, I'm always torn about this, the electoral system issue, because there's always a problem when you have a democracy where most people don't vote for one party. So in the 20th century, pretty much never has any party got more than 50%. Even Clement Attlee's government's only got, 49% of the vote. And when that happens, if you have another electoral system, so if you have proportional representation, what then happens is a coalition. But the problem with that is no one's voted for that government. And what you'd end up in this situation, in theory, is Nick Clegg would always be in government.
What do you say to the young people out there who say, I can't be bothered to vote? Amel?
I think being disengaged from politics is unacceptable. I mean, you guys, us up here, are, as many people have said tonight, the luckiest people on the planet. And I think not being engaged in politics at all is a disgrace, and it's completely unacceptable. And I think it's morally required of you guys to be engaged and to try and make a difference. I think you've got to work out how you do that.
I'd say, don't say I can't be bothered to vote, because it makes it sound like you don't care about the world, and I know that can't possibly be true. I'd say instead, I reject the current Westminster politics, and I choose alternative methods to engage with the world, alternative methods to have my voice heard.
Another thing just to say is what I'm talking about in terms of the motion today is Westminster as an institutional structure, not necessarily just the individuals within it. So I hope you can be anti-Westminster whilst being pro some of the people within it.
The people in this room, I think we should acknowledge, are a kind of self-selecting group. You already care about politics. You already believe on some level that you can change the world, and that's good. I applaud you for that. I admire you. But I think the sad thing is that whatever side of this debate you come down on, the people who we're really interested in getting to, the people who are not in this room, the people who would never dream of coming to something like that.
If you agree with that it's right for young people to give up on Westminster, you have to hold up the horrible picture of Russell Brand. I'm sorry.
And you have to snug it as well.
And at the same time, if you disagree, could you hold up the I vote card? So I'll do it on the count of three, all right? 1, 2, 3. Hold it there for a second. Keep holding. Sorry, tired arms. That's great. Thank you very much.
I thought it was a really interesting event. Like, we never really have stuff like this, so it was really nice to see so many young people discussing things, showing that we are interested in politics.
I mean, I would have liked to see a couple of political scientists, some politicians, maybe even just, local councillors lower down on the scale to talk about their involvement and how kind of local politics plays into the whole debate. I would have just liked to see, I'd love to see journalists on the panel because I always think they provide a nice independent voice. But when you have 5 independent voices, where is the real debate coming from?
That was really interesting, actually. The panel made a lot of good points, and it was certainly something that I learned a lot from.
Yeah, I think it was great because I haven't been to anything like this before, and it was really nice to see a room of people my own age, like really engaging and talking about topics that are actually quite important to me, and I know a lot of other people.